Hi, friends. My name is Grandma Eveline, and I'm 48 years old. Today I'm going to tell you a story I've carried in my heart for nearly 3 decades. A story the world thought was a mystery. For 28 years, the world believed that Sister Grace and her 4 companions had vanished into the storm of a September night in 1979. Some whispered that we drowned in the floodwaters. Others claimed we had fled with men in secret shame. But the truth, what really happened inside those stone walls, is far darker than any of those tales. I am Grace, 70 years old now. For nearly 3 decades, I've lived in silence, watching the world move on, while I carried a secret heavy enough to crush a soul. Today I will break that silence. I will tell you why 5 women, bound by faith and fear, were forced to climb over the convent walls and disappear forever. This is not a story about losing faith. It's a story about evil hiding beneath holy robes. It's about the devil who wore a priest's collar and the sacred institution that turned its eyes away, and it's about 5 women who had to trade their vows for survival. If you are listening, I ask you to stay until the end. Some truths are painful, yes, but necessary. What I reveal may shake what you believe about power, faith, and the fragile line that separates good from evil. I had always been quiet. Even as a child, my mother used to say I could see what others overlooked. Perhaps that's why I was the first to sense that something wasn't right inside St. Mary of Peace. I entered the convent at 16, drawn by devotion and a longing for purpose. Life within those walls felt simple at first, every hour filled with prayer, work, and sisterhood. There were 5 of us under Mother Agnes, a strict yet kind woman who ruled with discipline and compassion. The convent, perched above the small town of Havenwood, was a symbol of peace. Its gardens bloomed year-round, and the chapel bells echoed purity. But that illusion shattered the day Father Michael arrived. Tall, eloquent, and commanding, he was everything a man of God was supposed to be. Or so we thought. The townsfolk admired him instantly, but beneath his sermons, I noticed something unsettling. The lingering glances, the too gentle touches, the questions during confession that probed deeper than they should. At first, I told myself it was imagination. But when I saw Sister Sarah, barely 19, avoid his presence with trembling hands, I knew my instincts were right. Something was rotting in the house of God, and soon it would consume us all. Because once evil finds a home within holy walls, faith alone is never enough to cast it out. The air inside the convent changed the moment Father Michael became our new spiritual guide. The light that used to spill softly through the chapel windows began to feel cold. His sermons were powerful, yes, but his eyes told another story, one that made my stomach twist with unease. At first we dismissed it. We wanted to believe in his goodness. After all, who were we to question a man chosen by the church? But faith can blind even the most perceptive soul. And soon the whispers began. Sister Sarah avoided being alone in the sacristy. Sister Joy, once radiant, grew quiet and nervous. Even Sister Eleanor, the sharp-minded scholar among us, started to spend more time in silence, her usual confidence replaced by something cautious and uncertain. It was around this time that Mother Agnes fell gravely ill. Pneumonia, they said. With her bedridden, Father Michael assumed control over most of our duties. That was when his visits became more frequent, and the lines between guidance and violation blurred. I will never forget the night I first saw it with my own eyes. I had gone to the library to return a prayer book when I heard a stifled sob. There, between the shelves, Father Michael had cornered Sister Sarah. His hand gripped her wrist with cruel force while his other brushed against her face. Her expression was a mixture of terror and shame. When he noticed me, his calm demeanor didn't waver. He simply smiled, a smile so cold it froze my breath, and walked away as though nothing had happened. Sarah stood motionless, her eyes glassy, until she collapsed into quiet sobs. That night I lay awake, torn between fear and fury. I tried to confide in Sister Eleanor, my closest friend. At first she said nothing, her silence as heavy as the darkness around us, but soon her intellect began to work, analysing every detail I recounted. She started keeping her own quiet watch. A week later she whispered to me one word that changed everything: proof. And so we began to document. Each inappropriate glance, every forced confession, every word that hinted at blasphemy. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a system of abuse disguised as divine authority. I prayed for guidance, begging God to show us what to do, but the answer came not in peace, but in the form of resolve. True faith, I realized, is not submission. It's the courage to confront evil, even when it wears the garments of holiness. But courage in the wrong place can turn faith into a death sentence, and our defiance had only just begun. Once we began documenting Father Michael's transgressions, the walls of St. Mary's seemed to close in around us. Every echo of footsteps in the corridor made my heart skip. Each knock on the door felt like the arrival of judgment itself. We were living in constant fear, fear of discovery, fear of disbelief, fear that the God we prayed to every dawn might be watching in silence. Sarah's spirit withered first. She avoided eye contact, her once gentle voice barely more than a whisper. Sister Joy's laughter, the sound that used to fill the convent halls, vanished. She moved like a ghost, her eyes swollen from tears. And I, once the quiet observer, was now consumed by a storm of rage. Father Michael grew bolder, confident in his immunity. Without Mother Agnes to protect us, his shadow stretched long over every room. He would call on us individually, under the guise of confession or counsel, and leave us trembling. His sermons about purity and obedience became veiled weapons. The man who stood at the altar no longer preached salvation. He demanded submission. When Sarah came to me one night, shaking and half-dressed, the marks of his hands still visible on her face, something inside me broke. "He said it was penance," she whispered, her words cracked and desperate, that if I refused, I'd be denying God's will. I held her as she cried, and for the first time in my life, hatred filled my prayers. The next morning, I made a choice. If no one inside these walls would protect us, I would seek justice outside them. Under the pretense of purchasing medicine, I left for town and went directly to the office of the bishop. I spent 3 hours in that waiting room, 3 hours rehearsing the courage not to falter. When I was finally received, I told him everything, every detail, every cry, every act of desecration. The bishop listened with a stony face, his hands folded neatly on his desk. When I finished, he sighed and asked, "Sister Grace, are you certain? Father Michael is a man of exemplary record." Those words hollowed me out. Even then, I clung to the hope that truth would prevail. He promised to investigate, but urged me to remain silent for the sake of the Church's reputation. 2 days later, Father Michael returned to the convent with a smile carved from malice. "God punishes liars, Sister Grace," he whispered as he passed me. My blood ran cold. The bishop had told him everything. In that moment, I understood. The Church would protect its wolves before it ever saved its lambs. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. The bishop's silence had sentenced us all. Within hours, Father Michael had turned the tables, accusing me of blasphemy, of spreading lies, of disobedience against a holy man. The word transfer began circulating through the convent halls, followed by whispers of madness. Soon an official letter arrived. I was to be sent to a remote convent in Montana for spiritual rehabilitation. That night, as I sat in my cell-like room, I realized that obedience would mean surrendering not just my freedom, but the lives of my sisters. If I left, the others would remain trapped under his control. The decision came quietly, but with the certainty of divine fire. I would not go. We would not go. When I shared my plan with the others, silence fell like dust in the cellar. 5 women bound by faith and fear stared at each other in disbelief. "If we run," Sister Eleanor whispered, "they'll say we're guilty." "They already do," I answered Joy, her eyes red from crying, said what we were all thinking. We're not running from God, we're running from the monster who pretends to speak for him. The oldest among us, Sister Martha, nodded slowly. God does not live behind walls. If leaving means saving our souls, then his will be done. And so we began to plan. The convent's walls were high, lined with broken glass and guarded by locked gates. Escape seemed impossible until our miracle arrived in the form of Mr. Miller, the quiet vegetable supplier who had delivered goods to us for years. One afternoon, as he unloaded crates of carrots and potatoes, he looked at me and said softly, "You don't look well, Sister Grace. If you ever need help, I'll be here." Something in his tone told me he wasn't speaking of physical illness. Days later, I slipped him a note hidden beneath a sack of onions. His reply came written on the back of a receipt. "There's a section of the wall that's weak. The oak tree beside it can hide you. I'll leave a rope ladder." Hope, for the first time in months, flickered like a candle in the dark. We prepared carefully. Eleanor stole our identification papers from the archives. Joy gathered medicine. Sarah and I packed plain clothes Mr. Miller had left us. Sister Martha, trembling, kissed her rosary and whispered, "We go in the rain. It will hide our steps." The night before our flight, I lay awake listening to the storm roll in, thunder shaking the sky like a warning. We were ready, but the fear of failure was suffocating. When the convent bell struck midnight, we would cease to be nuns and become fugitives in God's name. Midnight. The storm struck with biblical force, lightning tearing the sky into shards of white. The convent bell tolled 12 times, each chime sounding less like a call to prayer and more like a funeral knell for the lives we were leaving behind. In the cellar, 5 women stood dressed in plain clothes, their habits folded neatly on the shelves. We no longer looked like brides of Christ, but like strangers about to vanish into the dark rain, pounded against the stone walls as we slipped out through the pantry, our breaths loud and ragged in the silence. Joy led the way, her trembling hands knotting together a rope of old sheets. The wind howled through the trees as she flung the rope over the back wall. I climbed first, gripping the wet fabric until my hands burned. Behind me came Joy, then Sarah, Eleanor, and finally Martha, who struggled but refused to stop. When she reached the top, soaked and gasping, she looked at me and whispered, "We're almost free." The moment our feet hit the muddy ground on the other side, we ran. Through the storm, through the mud, through the terror. Lightning illuminated our figures like ghosts fleeing purgatory. Just beyond the hill, Mr. Miller waited with his old pickup truck, the headlights dimmed under the rain. He ushered us in wordlessly. 3 in the front, 2 hidden under a tarp in the back. As the truck jolted forward, I looked back one last time. The convent stood silhouetted against the sky, its spire rising like a warning finger. I whispered a final prayer, not for forgiveness but for strength. After an hour, the truck veered off the road and stopped inside an abandoned barn. "You'll be safe here for now," Mr. Miller said, his voice trembling. "My cousin Sam will take you farther tomorrow." The barn smelled of hay and damp wood. There were blankets, food, and a lantern waiting. For the first time in years, we prayed, not in fear but in gratitude. Morning came soft and grey. The rain had eased, though our hearts were still heavy. When I looked around at my sisters, no longer nuns but women reborn, I saw exhaustion, sorrow, and something else entirely. Peace. Mr. Miller returned by noon. "They're already searching," he warned. "You'll need new names, new stories. You can't be who you were anymore." So, in that quiet barn, we buried our identities. Grace became Linda. Sarah became Emily. The others chose names that felt foreign in their mouths. We spoke them aloud until they felt like armor. That night, as we boarded Sam's truck bound for North Carolina, the horizon cracked open with the first hint of dawn. For the first time, light didn't come through stained glass. It came from freedom itself. And now, after 28 years in the shadows, it's time the world finally heard the truth we carried through the storm.